Just a reminder before today's programme that the previous episode of the ident review is still available to view, where we headed over to Sweden to take a look at some idents from Canal 5. And now, here on AMTV, time for the newest instalment of the ident review, and this time we're heading back to the UK TV network. We've delved into the UK TV network a few times here on the ident review before, whether it's having a look at UK TV branded channels themselves or offshoots such as Really. And today we look at another offshoot from the network. Originally launching as UK TV History in 2002, 7 years later, in 2009, it would be rebranded to the name it holds now, Yesterday. Showing a mix of older programming including documentaries and dramas, we'll be focusing on the batch of idents that debuted with the channel's rebrand in 2009. So let's begin with the first of these, football.
Tristan has a new assignment as a fertility counsellor now in the acclaimed adaptation of a James Herriot classic, created for the BBC, chosen by Yesterday. It's all creatures, great and small.
Anyone guess the theme in yet? Well, we see a group of football supporters chanting away as they do, but instead of the audio resembling typical chants, it instead is audio of warriors at the battlefield, getting ready to charge at the enemy. And thus we have this ident set's main running theme, the idea of taking something from the past and something from the present, that both have a link or similarity, and mash them together. Quite a simple concept when you get down to it, to be honest. I think it works quite well. To hear football supporters sound like warriors, it kind of makes sense. Ever been to a football game and think the two chanting sides are going to charge and attack each other at any minute? Well, there's your correlation. The past and present vibe also works well with the channel's logo, going from a parchment-like effect to the main channel look, which if I'm honest looks kind of bland. The blend of lime green with a grey-white tone just doesn't really work and it leaves a lot to be desired. But let's see how well the central concept of this set holds up with our next ident now, debutantes.
Art rock at 5 when Lou Reed and David Bowie make their mark on the 7 Ages of Rock. That's new and unmissable here on Yesterday, after Andrew Marr's history of modern Britain.
Now this is some music I can get behind. We see some classic black and white footage of some ballroom dancers dancing to some thumping 90s sounding dance music. And it may just be me, but the music matched with these visuals doesn't seem to be out of place from a Pet Shop Boys music video or something like that. It's a shame that the continuity announcer cuts in so quickly, so we don't really get to hear much of the music against the footage. It dampens the impact a bit. But in terms of using the past-present motif, this is an obvious but brilliant choice to go for. And to be honest, the music matches the footage quite well. I'm surprised that the first Yesterday logo is a more modernish 90s design instead of something that matches the ballroom aesthetic. Sure, it matches the music, but I do think we needed one Yesterday logo that really is rooted in the past, as in further than 20-30 years ago, and then the main logo itself to follow. Anyhow, let's pace on now to our third ident of the day, which is titled as Hoodies.
From Ziggy Stardust to the dark side of the moon, we bring you the stories behind the seminal records of the 20th century, created for the BBC, chosen by Yesterday. It's brand new, 7 Ages of Rock.
I find this one strangely eerie and powerful. The link between monk-like chanting and hoodies is certainly there. Groups of hooded folk hanging around together, practicing their own beliefs and lifestyles. It certainly is an example of the past meeting the present. And the ethereal chanting of the monks works so beautifully with the dark, moody visuals we see here. Gangs of young hoodies moving around the city they live in, meeting each other, working with one another, just as monks did back in the day. Again, the announcer comes in far too quick, and I hope there's a clean version of this ident out there somewhere. In terms of the Yesterday title cards, I'm a bit disappointed that they just reused the same past card as the football sequence. I mean, it does work, but you're telling me that they couldn't come up with a little something tiny bit different from this one? Aside from the title cards, I'd argue that this one is my favourite ident so far in terms of a stylistic sense. But now we shall crack on with our next sequence today, that being War.
Joining us now live.
These images captured by a passerby.
With archive footage of dead soldiers, Peter and Dan Snow shed new light on a conflict that changed the world. You're watching 20th Century Battlefields on Yesterday.
News Justice.
I reckon this one is a bit more nuanced. We see some old footage of wars gone by and the strategies and means of communication that those serving in it had to work with. The present element comes in the form of the audio, the sound of the more modern forms of communication that we're used to. Whereas the previous three idents had all their past and present links very obvious and in the face of the audience, I kind of enjoy how this one is a bit more subtle. Although you could argue that it's so subtle that many viewers might miss the link altogether and be left at a bit of a loss. What I love though is seeing all of this old war stock footage. I think any footage preserved in beautiful black and white is always a joy to see on the TV, and provides us younger viewers with a great insight into just what life was like back in our parents' and grandparents' time. Finally, I do just want to say how I really enjoyed the first Yesterday slide, showing a digital logo against a modern circuit board to show just how far we have advanced technologically. And from war, we shall move into innovation, with our penultimate ident of the day, flight.
3, 2, 1, 0.
This is Yesterday, the new home of UK TV history. James is threatened with legal action and a shotgun at 3 in All Creatures Great and Small, right after the Antiques Roadshow.
The human innovation in flight is always fascinating to see. We see early footage of the Wright brothers, some of the early pioneers of human flight and the development of what we know as airplanes. The audio, representing the present, is a recording of man's early ventures into space. And when you clock that against this old footage, the true breadth and advancement mankind has made in flight is staggering. To go from experimental and often dangerous prototypes to being able to break free from Earth's boundaries and venturing into the unknown of space. The human race is far from perfect, but in terms of sheer innovation and progress in this field, we haven't done half bad, I would say. The first Yesterday slide is equally as charming, mimicking the displays of Apollo spacecraft in the 1960s, once more showing our progress as a species. Isn't it mad how the technology deemed so advanced in those 60s spacecrafts has now been endlessly superseded by the tech in our mobile phones? How times change indeed, and this ident really hones in this feature of the past being mixed with the present to present to an audience. And with that, we shall move on to what will be our final ident of the day, which is titled as Suffragettes.
Biting political drama every weekday at 5 here on Yesterday. For the first time ever on British TV, see the House of Cards trilogy in full. This Emmy Award-winning series starts on Monday, but now we've a double bill from the Alan Clark Diaries.
A great blend of elements to finish on. The use of punk music to accompany footage of the suffragette movement may seem surprising at first, but when you dig deeper, it actually makes perfect sense. Punk music in the 70s and 80s was all about rebelling against societal norms, a form of expression that the establishment wouldn't like, but one that identified with countless amounts of people. The suffragettes embodied that same principle of rebelling against the establishment and campaigning for expression, and in their case, equal rights, something which women sadly, even now arguably, don't have today, around 100 years after the suffragettes came about. Those women made some great strides historically, and they won't ever be forgotten, but seeing footage of it with punk music only seems all too apt, and the designers clearly did their research and chose exactly what would fit well here. The first Yesterday title slide is reminiscent of punk iconography of the late 70s, summarising the use of punk music in the ident itself. Overall, this one has one of the strongest combinations out of the entire set, as in many ways, a great sequence to conclude on today. Overall, the Yesterday idents introduced in 2009 take a simple ident and really does wonders with it. Being able to combine elements of the past with the present can be difficult to pull off effectively, but for the most part, the sequences here do a decent enough job. They definitely could have pushed it further, but for what we have, it's an example of 21st century TV idents at some of their most creative peaks. Drawing parallels in some ways obvious, other ways subtle, but if anything, Yesterday as a channel may not be too well known, but for those of us into idents and TV preservation, these I would argue certainly takes its small place in television history. But thank you very much for watching, and we will catch you next time here on the IDEM Review. A massive thank you to our producer and director patrons for your support towards us here at AMTV. You just help keep us going, and that's massively appreciated. And that does bring us to the end of another evening here on AMTV. We hope you enjoyed the programme, and we hope to see you next time. Good night.